Most rankings like this are just a list of cities the guy making the video has visited for 2 weeks each, stacked in whatever order felt right after the third mezcal. What you get is tourism advice dressed up as relocation advice. Those are not the same thing. A city that's incredible to visit for 10 days can quietly destroy your quality of life at month 8, and vice versa. I'm Alex. I've lived in 4 Latin American cities over the last 9 years. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear framework for understanding which of these 7 cities actually fits your specific situation, your budget, your temperament, your work setup, and what you're actually trying to build with your life down here. Before we dive in, please subscribe so you don't miss future city breakdowns. I cover these comparisons in depth, and there's a lot more coming. Now let me tell you how I built this ranking and why the criteria matter before I give you the list. The ranking is built on 5 factors, weighted in this order. Cost-to-quality ratio, not just how cheap a city is, but what you're actually getting for the money. Infrastructure for remote workers, reliable internet, banking access, visa pathways, co-working options. Long-term livability, what month 4 feels like, not what day 4 feels like. Cultural accessibility, how hard is it, practically, to build a real life there as an English-speaking foreigner. And city safety as a practical reality, not a headline number. I am deliberately not ranking these by how exciting they feel on arrival. Excitement is a terrible metric for relocation decisions. Almost every city in Latin America feels exciting when you land. The question is, what remains after the excitement, and you're just living your actual life? Cooking at home, dealing with a landlord, waiting for your internet to be repaired, navigating a tax question, sitting with a doctor. Those mundane moments are where the real city reveals itself. Dating is not a ranking factor. I know some of you want that. There are channels for that. This isn't one of them. What I'm trying to answer here is, where can a single man in his 30s, 40s, or early 50s build a functional, sustainable, high-quality life at a cost that makes sense and actually stay? One more thing before the ranking. Being single here means you're optimizing for yourself alone. No school districts, no partner's career constraints, no need to be near family. That's actually a significant advantage for relocation, and it's the lens through which I've built this list. You have maximum flexibility. The goal is using it well. Let's go. Number 7 on this list is Cartagena, Colombia. I want to be fair to Cartagena because I know this city well, and I understand why it keeps appearing on these lists. The old city, the walled Centro Histórico, the color, the heat, the Caribbean pace is genuinely unlike anywhere else in Latin America. If you've never been, it does something to you. I get it. But for long-term relocation, Cartagena has structural problems that most YouTube content completely ignores. The first is the heat. This isn't a minor complaint. Cartagena averages around 32 to 35 degrees Celsius year-round with high humidity. That sounds fine when you're coming from a Chicago winter. After 3 months, it reshapes your entire life. You stop walking anywhere. You stop wanting to be outside after 10 in the morning. Your world shrinks to air-conditioned interiors, and you begin to feel like you're either in a refrigerator or a sauna. Some men adapt and genuinely love it. Many don't. The second problem is the tourist premium. Cartagena's economy is built almost entirely around tourism and a domestic elite clubs from Bogotá and Medellín, who use it as a weekend destination. That means prices in the neighborhoods you'll actually want to live. Boca Grande, Manga, Getsemani are inflated relative to what you're getting in terms of infrastructure quality. A decent 2-bedroom in Boca Grande runs $900 to $400 a month. That is not cheap for Colombia. And you're not getting the infrastructure of Medellín or Bogotá for that money. Internet can be unreliable. Co-work options are limited. The expat professional community is thin. Getsemani is the neighborhood with the most interesting street-level energy. The murals, the neighborhood feel, the slightly gritty texture that hasn't been fully smoothed away by tourism yet. It's worth understanding. But it's a small neighborhood and you will outgrow it as a daily living environment fairly quickly. Who actually works in Cartagena? Men who are either already financially independent and don't need co-working infrastructure, or men who are semi-retired and have simplified their work footprint significantly. If you're running anything bandwidth intensive or you need a professional support ecosystem, Cartagena is going to frustrate you. The Colombia Digital Nomad Visa works here as it does in any Colombian city, which is a real positive. And the lifestyle, slower pace, Caribbean culture, the ability to jump to the islands or the Rosario chain is genuinely appealing for the right person. It just belongs at number 7 because for most men reading this as a practical relocation decision, there are better options. Number 6 is Lima, Peru. Lima is the city on this list that I would most strongly caution you to visit before committing to. Not because it's bad. Lima is a serious, functioning city, but because it has a specific texture that a lot of men find very difficult to connect with emotionally. And that matters more than people want to admit. The coastal weather is the thing nobody warns you about adequately. Lima sits in a desert climate modified by the Humboldt Current, which means it's gray. Not occasionally gray. Gray from roughly May through November, a low, flat overcast called the Garua that sits over the city like a permanent ceiling. No rain, no sun, just diffuse gray light. If you have any vulnerability to seasonal mood issues, Lima in winter will test you in ways you did not anticipate. The infrastructure, by contrast, is genuinely solid. Miraflores, the main expat neighborhood, is clean, walkable, safe, and organized in a way that few Latin American neighborhoods are. The restaurants in Lima are legitimately world-class. Barranco, the arts neighborhood 15 minutes south of Miraflores, has a bohemian character that's more interesting than anything comparable in the city. San Isidro is the business district if you need that environment. Cost of living in Lima sits in the middle of this list. A good 2-bedroom in Miraflores runs $900 to $1,400 a month. Eating out is reasonable. A solid dinner for 2 at a good restaurant in Miraflores is $40 to $60. Peruvian food really is exceptional, and that's not travel blog language. It's a practical quality of life point, because you will eat well for less money than in most of these cities. The real issue in Lima for a single man building a social life is penetrability. Lima's social structure is deeply family and class-oriented in ways that are harder to navigate as a foreigner than in Colombia or Mexico. Peruvians are warm but relatively private. Building a real social network, not a tourist bubble, an actual social network, takes longer in Lima than in any other city on this list. The expat community in Miraflores is real, but it skews heavily toward families and NGO workers rather than the professional remote worker demographic that makes up most of this channel's audience. Peru's visa situation has improved in recent years. The extended tourist stay and the broader immigration framework are workable for someone with clear income documentation. It's not as straightforward as Colombia's digital nomad visa or Mexico's temporary resident pathway, but it functions. Lima at number 6 means serious city, worth understanding, but too specialized in its drawbacks to rank higher for most men in this audience. If the gray weather doesn't bother you, the food culture appeals to you, and you prefer a quieter, more structured expat environment, Lima deserves a longer look than it usually gets. Number 5 is Bogotá, Colombia. Bogotá has been massively undersold on YouTube because it's harder to photograph than Medellin and it doesn't have Medellin's cinematic origin story. But for a certain kind of man, particularly men in their 40s and above, or men who want a more serious, metropolitan environment, Bogotá is quietly the better city. The climate is the first underrated point. Bogotá sits at 2,600 meters elevation, which gives it a permanent spring temperature, low 20 Celsius most of the year, cooler at night. After a few months in Medellin's perpetual summer, that range feels like a relief. You can wear a jacket. You can go for a run in the middle of the day without it being a punishment. Bogotá's upscale neighborhoods. Usaquén, Chapinero, Zona G, Rosales, function at a genuinely high standard. The restaurant scene is better than its reputation suggests. The art and culture infrastructure is the most serious in Colombia by a significant margin. If you care about museums, live music, functioning art scene, or access to a professional class of people who are doing serious things, Bogotá delivers. Cost of living is slightly higher than Medellin, but not dramatically so. A 2-bedroom in Usaquén or Zona Rosa runs roughly $1,100 to $1,700 a month, depending on the specific block and building. Coworking options are extensive. WeWork operates here, and there are many quality independent spaces in Chapinero, and Zona G private health insurance is $90 to $180 a month for solid coverage. The crime narrative around Bogotá is partially valid and partially outdated. The city is large and uneven. Areas like Ciudad Bolivar in the south are places a foreigner has no reason to be. But Usaquén on a Saturday afternoon, or Zona G on a weeknight, is as safe as any comparable upscale neighborhood in Latin America. The rule is the same as every city on this list. Geography matters more than the city's aggregate crime statistics. The practical infrastructure is excellent. Colombia's digital nomad visa is clean and accessible. if you can document $900 USD per month in income, which is a low bar for most of this audience. Banking with a Colombian account is more accessible than it used to be, though getting established still requires some patience. Internet in the upscale neighborhoods is solid. 100 to 200 megabit fiber is standard. Who thrives in Bogotá? Men who want a serious city. Men who read. Men who want access to Latin America's largest business culture without living in Sao Paulo. Men who want Colombia's friendliness and accessibility but find El Poblado in Medellín too resort-like. If you're building something, a business, a consulting practice, a serious creative project, Bogotá gives you an environment that takes itself seriously. The trade-off is that Bogotá doesn't love you back immediately the way Medellín does. It's a city you have to earn. That suits some men very well. For others, the initial emotional coldness is too much and they bail before they've actually seen the city. Number 4 is Buenos Aires, Argentina. Buenos Aires is the most complicated city on this list to evaluate honestly in 2026, and the reason is almost entirely economic. Argentina has been in a multi-year economic crisis that has created conditions that are, depending on your income source, either very good or very bad. And you need to understand the difference before making any decisions. If you earn in US dollars, which describes most of this channel's audience, the parallel exchange rate in Argentina has, for several years, given dollar earners purchasing power that is simply unmatched anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere. At its most favorable, you were getting 2 to 3 times the official rate. The government has made moves to unify the exchange rate structure, and that gap has narrowed. But Buenos Aires still represents extraordinary value for dollar earners right now in a way that Medellín or CDMX does not. A 2-bedroom apartment in Palermo Soho or Palermo Hollywood, the primary expat neighborhoods, runs $700–200 a month. At the right dollar rate, you're getting a genuinely European quality apartment in one of the most walkable, cafe-dense, culturally rich neighborhoods in Latin America for less than you'd pay for a studio in Atlanta. That gap matters. It gives you margin. It gives you savings rate. It changes what your life actually looks like. Buenos Aires is architecturally the most beautiful city on this list without argument. The European urban grid, wide boulevards, ornate facades, bookshops that could be in Paris, a serious theater culture, an obsessive cafe tradition is unlike anywhere else in the region. The food culture is real. The beef is what everyone says it is. The wine is excellent. The restaurant scene in Palermo and Recoleta punches well above its weight. The infrastructure, though, comes with friction. Argentina's banking system is a significant headache for foreigners. Getting a local bank account requires residency. Many transactions still run heavily on cash in ways that CDMX or Bogotá no longer do. Internet quality is solid in Palermo but inconsistent in other neighborhoods. The political volatility, a new government, ongoing economic adjustment, uncertainty about the exchange rate landscape means you are making decisions in a less stable environment than any other city on this list. The visa situation is actually one of the easiest in the region. Argentina offers a digital nomad visa, and the tourist entry requirements are minimal for U.S. passport holders. Staying legally for extended periods is more straightforward here than in Mexico or Peru. The culture is warm but takes getting used to. Porteños, Buenos Aires residents, have a particular social culture. Late nights, a dinner culture that genuinely starts at 10 p.m., an emotional expressiveness that's different from Colombian or Mexican warmth. For men who love conversation, ideas, and a city that engages its own intellectual life seriously, Buenos Aires is addictive. At number 4, Buenos Aires sits because the economic instability introduces a level of operational risk that keeps it from ranking higher for most people considering a permanent base. If you're coming for 1 to 2 years and you can tolerate that uncertainty, it might be the best value proposition on this entire list. I want to pause for a second here. Which city are you actually considering? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone, and it helps me decide what to cover next. Number 3 is Medellín, Colombia. Medellín has been the default answer on YouTube for the last 5 years, and it earned that reputation genuinely. The climate eternal spring, low 70s Fahrenheit year-round, is extraordinary. The infrastructure in El Poblado and Lurales is excellent. The Colombia digital nomad visa process is clean. The cost of living is favorable without being deceptive, and the city has a social energy that makes integrating relatively easy for a foreigner. But Medellín drops to number 3 in 2026 for a specific reason, and it deserves to be said plainly. El Poblado has become expensive relative to what it is. The neighborhood has been so aggressively marketed to foreign remote workers and short-term visitors that prices in the core area, Provenza, Parque El Poblado, the streets around Lares, have approached Mexico City Roma Norte levels without delivering the same cultural density. A two-bedroom in Provenza now runs $1,200 to $800 a month. For Colombia, that's no longer cheap. And you're paying it to live in a neighborhood that sometimes feels more like a resort zone than a real city neighborhood. The counter-move is to live in Laureles, Envigado, or Sabaneta rather than El Poblado. Laurels in particular is where a lot of long-term residents, including expats who burned out on Poblado's revolving door of newcomers, have migrated. Rents in Laureles run $700 to $100 for a good two-bedroom. The neighborhood is more Colombian, more residential, and the daily lived experience feels less performed. If you're moving to Medellin seriously, Laureles should be your first serious look. The infrastructure for remote workers is genuinely strong. Fiber internet is standard in upscale buildings, coworking spaces. Selena operates here, and there are numerous quality independents. Give you a professional environment. The healthcare situation is solid. Medellin has a developed private clinic infrastructure that will handle most needs. Spanish tutors run $15 to $22 an hour, and the supply is good. The metro system is what nobody outside Colombia fully appreciates. Medellin has a cable car network, the Metro Cable, that extends the transit system up into the hillside barrios. For daily life in the city, the transit infrastructure is better than most Latin American cities. You can genuinely be car-free in Medellin in a way that's harder to sustain in Bogotá or Lima. The elevation, around 1,500 meters, and the valley geography give Medellin an atmospheric quality that's genuinely unusual. You get views of city lights at night that remind you you're in a place with actual geography. That sounds minor, but it affects the daily mood of living there in ways that are hard to quantify. At number 3, Medellin's placement reflects this. It's still one of the best cities in Latin America for this life, but the El Poblado premium has compressed its cost advantage significantly. And for men who want deeper cultural integration rather than a well-oiled expat bubble, the other cities above have more to offer. Number 2 is Mexico City, CDMX. I'm biased here in the sense that I'm currently living here on my second stint, so I'll try to hold myself to the facts rather than the feeling. Mexico City is the most culturally complex, infrastructurally sophisticated, and intellectually stimulating city in Latin America. That's not a promotional statement, it's a consequence of scale. This is a megalopolis of 22 million people, the third largest city in the Western Hemisphere, with a museum infrastructure, a restaurant culture, a contemporary art scene, a literary tradition, and a neighborhood texture that doesn't exist at the same depth anywhere else in this region. If you've only lived in Medellin or Cartagena and you come to Mexico City for the first time, the cultural weight of the place is genuinely disorienting. Roma Norte and Condesa are the neighborhoods most expats anchor in, and for good reason. They're walkable, dense, with good restaurants and cafes, safe, and have a social texture built around exactly the kind of professional creative class that most of this channel's audience wants access to. Rents in Roma Norte for a two-bedroom run $1,400 to $2,200 a month. That is the most expensive on this list for a comparable tier of apartment in a comparable tier of neighborhood. Condesa runs similarly. Plis Juarez and Del Valle are slightly more affordable alternatives, $1,000 to $500, with less polish but more authentic neighborhood texture. The visa pathway in Mexico is clean and well-structured. The temporary resident visa is accessible if you can document $2,000 USD or more per month in income. Higher bar than Colombia, but still achievable for most in this audience. Once you have it, the temporary resident path gives you a 2-year visa renewable to 4, and from there a path to permanent residency. Mexico also has one of the most straightforward processes for eventually opening a local bank account for foreign residents. The healthcare infrastructure in CDMX is the strongest on this list. The private hospital network, ABC Medical Center, Médica Sur Ángeles, offers care comparable to U.S. standards. Finding an English-speaking specialist is genuinely easy. Private health insurance for a man in his 40s runs $120 to $200 a month for solid comprehensive coverage, which is reasonable for what you're getting. The internet situation in Roma Norte and Condesa is generally excellent. 100 to 300 megabits fiber is standard in quality buildings. The co-working ecosystem is extensive. WeWork, spaces, and dozens of quality independents are distributed across the central neighborhoods. The pollution and traffic are real. CDMX has air quality issues that are not trivial, particularly in March and April when temperature inversion traps particulates in the valley. If you have respiratory issues, this matters more than the YouTube conversation usually acknowledges. The traffic, even for someone who isn't driving, shapes how you use the city, which neighborhoods are worth building your daily life around, and which require planning to visit. The altitude, 2,240 meters, takes some adjustment. The first 2 to 3 weeks you may feel unexpectedly winded. Most people adapt fully within a month. Mexico City at number 2 reflects this. The highest cultural ceiling on this list, the strongest infrastructure, the deepest long-term value for a man who wants to live somewhere genuinely serious. The rent premium is real and the pollution question is real. But for the man who came to Latin America to build something meaningful and not just to extend a vacation, CDMX is the most capable city on this list. Number 1 is Medellin. No, let me not be cute about it. Number 1 is a tie that isn't really a tie, and the city that takes it is one most of these rankings don't even include. Montevideo, Uruguay. I know some of you just raised an eyebrow. Hear me out. Montevideo is the most functional, most legally stable, most livable city in Latin America for a foreign professional who is serious about building a real life here long term. That sentence has a lot of qualifiers, and every one of them is intentional. Uruguay has the most developed rule of law in Latin America. Property rights, contract enforcement, banking stability, and political continuity operate at a standard that simply doesn't exist in Colombia, Argentina, or Mexico. If you're making financial decisions, renting, potentially buying, opening a business, the institutional environment in Uruguay is in a different category. Uruguay's residency process for income earners is one of the most accessible in the region. If you can show consistent income of around $2,500 USD per month, the legal residency process is clear, well documented, and administered predictably, which cannot be said about every country on this list. Montevideo is not the most exciting city on this list. I want to be explicit about that so nobody emails me angry. It doesn't have CDMX's cultural density or Medellin's social energy or Buenos Aires's beauty. What it has is stability, function, and a quality of life infrastructure that accumulates into something very valuable over a 3 to 5 year horizon. The healthcare system, which has a public-private hybrid called FANASA LAMSA, is accessible and genuinely decent. The city is clean. The internet is among the best in South America. The tax environment for foreign residents has historically been favorable, with Uruguay taxing only domestic income for the first 5 years of residency. Cost of living in Montevideo sits at the mid-range of this list. A 2-bedroom in Pocitos or Punta Carretas, the primary expat-adjacent neighborhood, runs $900 to $100 a month. The city is walkable, and the Rambla, the coastal boulevard that runs along the Rio de la Plata, gives the daily lived environment a texture that's genuinely pleasing. The social environment is quieter than Colombia and less immediately accessible than Mexico. Uruguayans are reserved in ways that take more time to crack than Colombians or Mexicans. Building real friendships takes longer. The expat community is smaller, but tends to be composed of people who made intentional, considered decisions rather than people running on YouTube enthusiasm. Who belongs in Montevideo at number 1? The man who is genuinely building something for the long term. Who cares about legal and financial stability as much as lifestyle? Who has seen enough of the other cities to understand that livable and exciting are not the same category, and who has decided that livable is what he actually needs. For the man who is still in the exploration phase, still testing cities, still figuring out what Latin America actually is for him, Montevideo is probably not where you should start. Start with Medellin or CDMX, get your bearings, learn the regional rhythm. Then, when you've done 2 or 3 years somewhere and you're thinking about permanence, come back to Uruguay and look at it with that lens. You'll see it completely differently. Here's the meta pattern across this entire list. Most men who end up in Latin America for the long term go through a predictable arc. They land in the most exciting city, usually Medellin, sometimes CDMX, and that city works well for year 1 and often year 2. The lifestyle premium is high and the cost advantage over the US is undeniable. Then, somewhere between month 18 and month 36, the city's friction accumulates to a threshold, and they either double down and integrate more deeply, or they start looking for the next move. The men who stay don't stay because the city is perfect. They stay because they've built something in it. A social network, a relationship with a neighborhood, a professional setup that functions, and that infrastructure is worth more than the theoretical improvement of moving somewhere else. The men who keep moving often discover, 5 years in, that they've been optimizing for excitement at the cost of depth. The truth about this decision is that no city on this list is the right answer for every man in this audience. The right city is the intersection of your budget, your work setup, your temperament, and what you're actually trying to build, not what looks best in a ranking video. Building these breakdowns takes real time. If this was useful, please support the channel by subscribing. I cover a different city every few videos, and the next one gets into a comparison that most people in this space are getting completely wrong. See you in the next one.